everybody, and welcome to your Top Think Tanks review. I am your host, Bryce Dolan. Now today we're going to cover 5 of your top 50 United States think tanks, and we're going to follow an article from each think tank. First, we'll begin with the American Enterprise Institute as they look at the idle army in America. Next, Human Rights Watch wants the United States to retain sanctions on Burma. Then the Atlantic Council shows a tense future for Uzbekistan as they await the announcement of their next leader. Then the Brookings Institution believes order in Asia to be at risk. Then we will end our show with the Hudson Institute and possible naval conflict between China and the United States. Now first, the American Enterprise Institute says Labor Day is an appropriate moment to reflect on a quiet catastrophe, the collapse over 2 generations of work for American men. During the past half century, work rates for United States males spiraled relentlessly downward. America is now home to a vast army of jobless men who are no longer even looking for work. Roughly 7 million of them are aged 25 to 54, the traditional prime of working life. Now this is arguably a crisis, but it is hardly ever discussed in the public square. Received wisdom holds that the United States is at or near full employment. The vice chairman of the Federal Reserve said in a speech last week that it is a remarkable and perhaps underappreciated achievement that the economy has returned to near full employment in a relatively short time after the Great Recession. Near full employment? Well, in 2015, the work rate for American males aged 25 to 54 was 84.4%. That's slightly lower than it had been in 1940 at 86.4% at the tail end of the Great Depression. Now, benchmarked against 1965, when American men were at genuine full employment, the male jobs deficit in 2015 would be nearly 10 million, even after taking into account an older population and more adults in college. Now, look at the fraction of American men aged 20 and older without paid work. In the past 50 years, it rose from 19% to 32%, and not mainly because of population aging. For prime working age men, the jobless rate jumped from 6% all the way up to 15%. Now, who are America's new cadre of prime age male unworkers? Well, they tend to be 1, less educated, 2, never married, 3, native born, and 4, more commonly African American. But those categories intersect in interesting ways. Black married men are more likely to be in the workforce than unmarried white men. Immigrants are more likely to be working or job hunting than native-born Americans. And high school dropouts from abroad are just as likely to be working or looking for work as native-born college grads. Now imagine how different America would be if today another roughly 10 million men held paying jobs. It is imperative for the future health of the country to make a determined and sustained effort to bring these detached men back into the workplace, into their families, and back into civil society. Now, Human Rights Watch has learned that the Obama administration is planning to lift sanctions on Burma during the Burmese leader Aung San Suu Kyi's visit to Washington, D.C., which begins on September 14th. While Human Rights Watch says the United States needs to keep in place sanctions on Burma to deter the Burmese military from derailing democratic reforms. Core sanctions include the gem trade, with which the Burmese military has had long been involved in illicit and abusive exploitation. Human Rights Watch says that key provisions in the current sanctions regime aim to prevent United States companies and individuals from doing business with military officials and military-owned enterprises. It also prohibits the import of Burmese jade and gemstones into the United States and restricts businesses and persons from involvement in that sector. U.S. sanctions are focused on the Burmese generals and their cronies in order to encourage democratic reforms, said John Sifton, Asia Advocacy Director at Human Rights Watch. The sanctions are crucial for pressing the military to end rights abuses and transfer power to a civilian government. They shouldn't be fully lifted until the democratic transition is irreversible. Now, during a joint news conference on May 22, 2016, Suu Kyi, the state counselor and foreign minister of Burma, and U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry both appeared to suggest that relaxing sanctions would not occur until Burma's military allowed the country's fundamentally flawed 2008 constitution to be revamped. The constitution reserves 25% of parliamentary seats for the military. It empowers the military to appoint the ministers of defense, home affairs, and border affairs, and it also allows the military to dissolve the government during a national emergency. So essentially, ladies and gentlemen, in short, this constitution in Burma back in 2008 was created to basically let the military do whatever they want. Now, the US and other governments should retain restrictions on military assistance and training and make increases in bilateral and multilateral assistance conditional on key reforms and military withdrawal from civilian government. Sanctions were always intended to press the Burmese military to relinquish power and embrace reforms, Sifton said. Now that real progress has been made, it's crucial to keep up the pressure until those goals have been achieved. Now, according to the Atlantic Council, Uzbekistan celebrated its 25th anniversary of independence on September 1st. But this was for the first time without its longtime president Karimov leading the dancing and music-filled celebrations in the capital. Karimov suffered a stroke on August 27th, and the Turkish Prime Minister said on September 2nd that Karimov had passed, even though there was no official confirmation of the news from Uzbekistan. Now, for generations that have grown up since 1989, Karimov is the only leader they have ever known. To them, the future is uncertain and insecure. Several analysts have suggested that the succession is likely to be controlled and that either the Prime Minister or First Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister will be handed the reins of power. As mandated by the Constitution, power may also transit via the head of the upper chamber of Parliament. In any case, the feared head of the National Security Service, the NSS, is likely to remain a key kingmaker. The NSS has for several years been the most influential part of the state. The longer the wait for the announcement of the name of Uzbekistan's next ruler, the greater the likelihood of infighting within the inner circle. This could undermine any smooth transition plans already in the making. Now, we hope that the leader to take Karimov's place in Uzbekistan is the right choice. Unfortunately, the choices that are up in the air aren't the best ones, but we will wait and see what happens in Uzbekistan. Now, next with the Brookings Institution, they explain the Asia paradox. In a commentary appearing in the Wall Street Journal shortly before her election as President of the Republic of Korea in late 2012, Madame Park described East Asia as a bifurcated region. Now, for those of you who don't know, bifurcated is like split, like a fork. According to then-candidate Park, Northeast Asia, which she defined as China, Japan, and the two Koreas, was the primary engine of global economic growth, and with the exception of North Korea, a singular example of regional cooperation, even without deeply rooted multilateral habits and practices. But she also observed that there was a clashing Asia, characterized by North Korea's accelerated pursuit of nuclear weapons, the resurgence of historical and territorial rivalries, and heightened military competition. She described these competing narratives as Asia's paradox. Now, answers must be sought in how regional leaders conceptualize their histories, strategic circumstances, and future expectations, including their perceptions of American power. Any assessment must begin with America's core alliance relationships in Northeast Asia. For more than half a century, the United States has been the primary beneficiary of the development of Japan and South Korea as major industrial powers and pivotal U.S. security partners. The emergence of two prosperous, powerful democratic allies with strategic and institutional identities closely aligned with the United States has been an undoubted success for U.S. policy. Now, building on this success presumes that both capitals will pursue compatible policy objectives and advance long-term goals that accord with American interests. At the same time, the United States must demonstrate continuity of purpose and strategic direction as it responds to the forces shaping Northeast Asia's future. Now, despite the apparent compatibility in the Japanese and Korean policy agendas, there is palpable political and interpersonal distance between the leaders of Japan and South Korea. At the same time, the U.S. presidential campaign has exposed fault lines within the American electorate that threaten to undermine long-dominant premises of U.S. regional strategy. Regardless of the outcome of the presidential election, these policy cleavages could directly affect future U.S. political, economic, and security relationships across Asia and the Pacific. America's role in regional geopolitics has helped keep the peace and enabled unparalleled prosperity for decades, but trends on both sides of the Pacific could prove very disruptive to regional order. In other words, for a long time there's been peace on both sides of the Pacific. With the recent activity, the military activity with China and North Korea, and the unknown results of this upcoming presidential campaign, we could see something change into something more disruptive, unfortunately. Now, to end the show with the Hudson Institute and possible naval conflict with China and the United States. This week, President Obama is making his final trip to Asia. With the presidential election looming, it is the right time to reflect on Obama's foreign policy and to think about what is to come. Now, a key component of the next president's foreign policy must be to compel China to respect international law. Otherwise, we may be faced by a conflict with a growing navy at a time when ours is decreasing in size. Obama has not made this imperative any easier. Now, on July 12th, an international tribunal at The Hague found that China possessed neither a historic claim over disputed islands in the South China Sea, nor a legal basis for sovereign claims over its waters. Now, on the same day of that ruling, Beijing landed civilian aircraft on 2 of the 3 reefs, Subi and Mischief, that China has now turned into armed islands. This gives China 3 working runways in the disputed Spratly Islands. That's the nearest of which is 600 miles from China. Notwithstanding Chinese president's 2015 statement to President Obama that the man-made islands would not be militarized, but continued construction of hardened hangars demonstrates Beijing's intent to deploy combat aircraft to the islands. Now, the State Department spokesman Rear Admiral John Kirby said, "The decision today by the tribunal in the Philippines-China arbitration is an important contribution to the shared goal of a peaceful resolution to disputes in the South China Sea. U.S. policy towards China has failed spectacularly. China's actions show that it sees us as a strategic competitor. We have chosen to see China as a large market that can be cajoled into joining us as a defender of international security and economic stability. U.S. policymakers hoped that the large volume of trade between China and the United States and the accompanying economic progress in the former would remold Chinese rulers to look, think, and act more like us. Well, the evidence does not support this roseate hope. China does not respect international law. Japan and the United States do. American policy has done nothing to resolve this fundamental difference, and the possibility increases daily that the growing weight of opposed interests could lead to accidents or actual hostilities. The United States should change its policy towards China so that instead of persuading its leaders to be more like us, our objective is to convince China through diplomacy, military strength, and increased presence that a conflict with us is not in their best interest." Well, ladies and gentlemen, you can find the link to all of these articles below in the description. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, give us a like on Facebook, or follow us on Twitter. But thank you for watching. This was your Top Think Tanks review, and I was your host, Bryce Dolan.